Hey folks, this is Shandron here, and what do you think is the highest potential armor class you can theoretically reach in Act 1 of Baldur's Gate 3? 40? 50? 60? Or maybe even 70? Depending on how much nonsense you're willing to put up with, the correct answer to this can actually get as high as 69. And even if you are the type who won't put up with any nonsense whatsoever, you can still get to armor class 49 right there on the sheet, potentially rising as high as 59 if anyone was capable of hitting us at those numbers. And yes, this is without including penalties to the enemy's attack rolls, like Radiant Orbs, Reeling, and the like. So how do we do this? Let's take a little journey into the world of excessive optimization, because this is most definitely a huge waste of time, as no enemy in the game, let alone in Act 1, is going to be able to get even close to hitting you at these numbers. But are we going to do it anyways? Of course we are, because it's fun and nerdy, and that's how we like things here in my corner of the internet. So here we go. Let's start by seeing how high we can get without any cheese at all. But now, let's assume we have enough integrity not to do such things. For now. We start off with just stacking all the best armor class gear we can find. As our chest piece of choice, we go with the simple Scale Mail +2. This becomes available at vendors from level 7 onwards, and you should easily be able to reach that in Act 1. This armor starts out at armor class 16, which then becomes 18 with the added max dex bonus of 2. For gloves, we are going with the Wondrous Gloves for a flat +1 bonus with no caveats. Bracers of Defense and some high dex shenanigans looks tempting, but at least in Act 1 it can't outperform actually using a shield. Not without getting stupid at least, but let's save that for later. For rings, we get to benefit from both slots. We use the Ring of Protection from Maul for +1 flat bonus, and then the Bracing Band gives us the option to shove an enemy in a fight to get +1 more armor class until our next turn. This does require a bonus action though, so we need to make sure we don't need that for anything else. The simple choice for weapon is the Defender's Flail for yet another flat +1. For now, let's stick with that. And then we need a shield as well. Here we go with the Adamantite Shield for crit immunity. Any other shield would technically give us the same armor class, so you don't have to, but crit immunity works interestingly in this game. If an attack would result in a crit, it becomes a miss instead, at least as long as your armor class is high enough. I know it isn't really relevant for what we're doing here, but let us dwell on that for a second. Any crit against you becomes a miss, not just a hit, but a miss. So with high enough armor class and crit immunity, we are literally immune to normal attacks. That kinda sorta counts for something, I guess. Proccing Reeling also doesn't hurt, but that definitely doesn't count for this exercise, as it doesn't directly affect our own armor class. There are no hats, boots, capes, or necklaces in Act 1 that gives us any armor class, so that was it from gear in Act 1. Now let's start adding some class abilities and feats. One level of fighter gets us +1 armor class from the fighting style defense. Unfortunately, we can't pick the same fighting style more than once, so 2 levels in paladin on top of this wouldn't grant us another +1. 4 levels in any class does get us a feat though, and there must be a feat we can use to get higher armor class, right? Indeed there is. Medium Armor Master allows us 1 more point of maximum dexterity, which translates to +1 armor class as long as we have 16 dexterity or more. All in all, this gets us to a pretty decent armor class of 25, 26 when shoving, which is still awfully far away from the 59 I promised. So, what gives? Okay, let's start throwing some spells into the mix. We start easy. Warding Bond gives a flat +1 with no concentration required. And Shield of Faith is another +2, but requires someone to concentrate to maintain it. Both of these last all day, and would ideally be cast from different characters. And that is kind of it for readily available, long-lasting buffs. Once we are ready for combat though, we can get +2 armor class from haste, or a speed potion, and then we can get no less than +9 extra from mirror images. Sure, these fall off fast, but we're theorizing here, not really being practical about it. Casting mirror images does take up one of our actions, but we could just precast it if that is a problem. It's also available as a scroll, so it's usable no matter what build we choose. That gets us all the way up to armor class 40. Still some way off. Okay, let's start cooking. 3 levels of Sword Bard gives us access to the defensive Flourish maneuver for another +4 armor class, getting us to armor class 44, but costing us an action. The next 5 comes from the Shield spell, but for that to happen someone has to be actually able to hit us, which honestly isn't happening at this point. Luckily, Shield has a fun interaction with the Magic Missile spell. Shield straight up counters it, so even though Magic Missile doesn't roll to hit, and therefore usually doesn't count as an attack, it is still capable of triggering the Shield spell. So now we just need someone to cast Magic Missiles at us, which luckily we can just do ourselves with another character. Shield lasts until the start of your next turn, so it's not a problem having it cast on you during your turn. Casting Shield does spend our reaction though, so we need to keep that in mind. And boom, 49 armor class straight there on the sheet. But where on earth do we find the last 10 then? The first 8 are quite simple. Have a Valor Bard, level 5 or above, use their combat inspiration on you for plus 1d8 to your armor class against the next attack against you. This could roll an 8, getting your armor class to 57 for that one attack. Now, obviously, no one in Act 1 could ever roll high enough to trigger the use of combat inspiration, so it's never actually going to happen. But I did say highest potential armor class, right? The last 2 points require us to get a little nerdy here, so let me just test my glasses and my game knowledge. If we can reach level 8 in Act 1, which we can unlock a second feat without losing access to any of the above bonuses by going Sword Bard 4, Eldritch Knight 4. This would allow us to take the very powerful armor class feat Defensive Duelist for another potential plus 3 to our armor class. There are only 2 problems. First, we have to be using a finesse weapon, so the defensive flail wouldn't work. This just means that the net benefit of this feat is only really plus 2 and not plus 3, which is still great. Secondly, and maybe more problematically, this feat requires a reaction, and we are already using our reaction on the shield spell. Luckily, when playing Spore Druid, which I just so happen to have been doing a lot, you find out pretty fast that reactions reset at the end of your turn, not at the start. So, if we use the magic missile from an ally trick during our turn, we can actually get the benefit of 2 reactions on the same attack. But only every other turn, of course. You still only get 1 reaction per turn, which is still fine for what we're doing. That means that in Act 1, without using any cheese whatsoever, you can technically get a potential armor class of 59, which is insane. I know, the last 10-11 points will never be activated, but they are still there. In theory, at least. So, there you have it. 59 potential armor class in Act 1 of Baldur's Gate 3. But that's just as long as we're still playing fair. So far, we've actually been following the game's rules, as they're supposed to be working. Let's start getting cheesy. First and simplest, it's pretty well known at this point that you can beat up Raphael in Act 1 and steal his armor. Kinda sorta requires you to break the game a bit, but let's be honest, he had it coming. And the wonky coding of the Helldusk armor's ability to be used by anyone opens up so many more options for fun. So let's use that. This armor is not a medium armor, so it doesn't work with the medium armor master feat. It also has a max dex of 0, so in total we lose 3 points of armor class from dexterity when using it. On the bright side, it has a base armor class of 21, which easily makes up for having no dex, and it even adds another plus 2 on top compared to the scale mail plus 2 and dex we were previously using. That would take us to armor class 61 with all of the nonsense from before. It even allows us another path to the exact same armor class, but without using a shield. Due to the way Helldusk armor is scripted, it actually counts as both not wearing armor and as wearing armor, which makes it work in tandem with both items like the Braces of Defense and the Fighting Style Defense, opening up the option to ditch the shield and go for dual wielding instead. The dual wielder feat gives plus 1 armor class when dual wielding. This is minus 1 armor class compared to using a shield, but since we now have the option of wielding the defensive flail in offhand while having a finesse weapon in our main hand for defensive duelist, we are at parity. Since we now count as wearing neither armor nor shield, we get to use the Braces of Defense for plus 2 instead of the plus 1 from the Wondrous Gloves, getting us up to armor class 62. We do lose crit immunity though, which means 20s will still hit us, but maybe we can find that somewhere else. Unfortunately, all crit immune items in Act 1 counts as armor, so it seems that the choice is either 61 and crit immune, or 62 and not. But nope, the wonky coding of the Helldusk armor strikes again. If you wear any piece of light, medium or heavy armor combined with the Helldusk armor, like for instance the Helmet of Grim, which just happens to be in a slot that we aren't using and give crit immunity, then you actually get to double dip on the bonus from the defense fighting style. This means that we can keep wearing the Wondrous Gloves, slap on the helmet for crit immune, and still be at armor class 62. This also works with any piece of armor while wearing the shield, so if you prefer sword and board to dual wielding, just stick with that. There's even a blade singing build that gets to the exact same armor class in Helldusk armor without the defensive flail. It does lose out on the crit immunity though. I will touch on this build towards the end of the video. At this point I was running a little low on options, but there was one avenue I still hadn't explored. NPC buffs. What if we use Glut to animate an enemy corpse to then have that corpse buff us? Since some enemy buffs have different names and functions, they stack with the spells that we are already using. And I actually found a promising target. The Mask of Servitude. One of Auntie Ethel's minions has an ability called Boon of Servitude, which it can cast on others, and which, among other things, grant plus 2 to armor class. Luckily, I had an old save game with a dead Mask of Servitude and a friendly Glot, so off to Ethel's lair to fetch the corpse I went, and then down into the Underdark to have her reanimated by Sovereign Glot. As it turns out though, some while ago, actually quite a long while ago, but I'm old, in patch 4, Larian took away the ability for Spore Servants to cast spells. So, no luck using that method. Maybe instead we could control an Undead with the Oathbreaker Paladin. But it turns out none of the Undeads in Act 1 have any ability to buff your armor class, so that path leads nowhere to. There is one last way to make use of NPCs though. If we manage to get our hands on a Scroll of Dominate Person, which we can sometimes buy from scroll vendors from character level 7 already, then maybe we could bypass the Spore Zombie nerf by just dominating people straight up. And yes, it is possible, but Dominate Person does not actually put you in control of that character, so they would have to choose to cast the spell on you themselves. Which makes this a lot less enticing. It is, though, theoretically still possible. So let's throw +2 armor class from the Mask of Servitude on the pile. It also turns out that the Mask of Servitude isn't the only NPC with an armor class buff in Act 1. None other than everyone's favorite mage, Roland, actually has a unique spell that is supposed to be a weaker version of Mage Armor, but which instead is just a flat +2 to armor class. We don't even really need to dominate him, as he is already a friend, and he may choose to cast it on us if we are in combat together. In fact, it should be reasonably possible to force him to do so by getting him into combat against a hostile pet, like Zombie Connor for instance, and denying him an offensive target by using Sanctuary. Once we have the buff, it lasts until long rest, so these 2 points of armor class should actually be golden. Editing Shandron here, and nope, this does not actually work in Act 1. I don't know whether or not it's a new patch, or it's because it's in Act 1 and not Act 3, but this does not work, and I'm gonna slap myself on the wrist and immediately subtract the 2 points of armor that I had added from this. That brings us to 64 armor class in Act 1. So, was that it? Is there really no way to get your armor class higher than 64 in Act 1? Well, technically there is one, but it's not one I would suggest that anyone takes, as it would be mind-numbingly boring to actually make it happen. It is technically possible though, so let's include it here anyways. So far I've limited myself to level 8 builds, since level 8 is the maximum level you can realistically hit in Act 1. But higher levels would make better builds possible. It would buff up things like the Valabard's Inspiration dice and our proficiency bonus for the Defensive Duelist. It would also allow us to access more class abilities, or even just more feats, which we might be able to use for something. So if it was possible to get beyond level 8 in Act 1, you could in theory reach higher than armor class 64. Which of course it is. In the Underdark you can find a Dwergar called Gek Cole who really likes summoning zombies when he gets into combat. Each of these zombies gives exactly 3 experience, and as long as you don't kill Gek Cole, you can kill the zombies, then leave combat and re-enter to have him summon more zombies. This would take forever, and it sounds abysmally boring to me, so there's just no way I'm gonna do that. But in theory, it's possible though. For the crit immune builds, this would take us to armor class 67, with the higher Valabard Inspiration dice at level 10, and the bonus to our proficiency at level 9, buffing up Defensive Duelist. But other than that, there aren't really any actual bonuses that we can find anywhere. For the Bladesinger build I briefly mentioned earlier, however, this could in theory let you get even higher. At level 8, it couldn't beat the other builds, as it just lost out on too many other bonuses to pick up Bladesinging. But with more levels, it can get some of those options back. If we go with the builds Swordsbard 4, Bladesinger 5, Fighter 1, we could get to use every bonus from the Braces of Defense version of the dual-wielding build above, except the offhand's Defensive Flail. So this would lose us 1 armor class from the Flail, but it would gain us 3 from Bladesinging. This now gets us to our final answer. The absolutely highest, theoretically possible potential armor class that you can reach in Act 1 of Baldur's Gate 3 is 69, which is well above double the amount needed to be unhittable, but good fun regardless. So, thank you for joining me in this ridiculously nerdy deep dive into futility. Hopefully some of the tricks and bugs used here were new to you, and although I would never suggest that anyone does all of the above, maybe adopting a trick or 2 to make your character unhittable isn't too bad of an idea. Whether you choose to or not, I hope you enjoyed the video. I've been Shandron, and you've most definitely been awesome. Don't forget to do the YouTube stuff, like, comment, subscribe, all that nonsense, and bye bye.